The earnings presentation does not have the outlook for the rest of the year. Typically, that's provided. Jurrien, what does that tell you about big banks and their quarters?
Well, it tells you that we're in a part of the business cycle where there's not a lot of visibility, if you will. You know, we're kind of in that twilight zone between mid-cycle and late cycle, and things get a little harder to figure out. You know, the yield curve has flattened, as you mentioned in a previous segment. That's generally a negative for financials, and that's I think one of the reasons why they've underperformed. And it all comes down to kind of where the Fed takes this cycle, you know, over the next couple of years. And when you're in mid-cycle, it's kind of a consistent playbook. But we're in a phase where it's a little bit more of a twilight zone where things are harder to figure out. So I'm not surprised that there is a lack of guidance there.
So how do you handle banks? Because if you were just going to do it from a bottoms-up basis, you'd want to buy JP Morgan, presumably, because the quarter was so strong and overall banks have underperformed. But it seems like financials have been trading more on the macro risks and not idiosyncratically. So as an investor, what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, you know, the financials and especially the banks were one of the big winners in the playbook that followed the presidential election, with, you know, deregulation, very positive for financials, of course, lower taxes, very positive, strengthening economy, you know, the return of animal spirits, rising yields, all generally very positive things for the banks and the financials. So it was all systems go. But then about 6 months or so ago, the yield curve really started to flatten, and that got a lot of people worried, because another playbook for a late cycle is that when the curve flattens and inverts, banks stop making money because their net interest margins go negative.
Yeah.
I think that fear was premature, because I think the yield curve, there's a little bit less than meets the eye in terms of yield curve flattening. So I'm not surprised that the overall sector is staging a little bit of a comeback.